Hey comic lovers, EMoney and the old man back with you again with Thor the Dog of Thunder.
Thor the Dog of Many Teeth.
Yep. On this scorcher day here in Louisville, Kentucky. We're all the way up to 45 degrees. It's just balmy, right?
I mean, compared to what it's been the last few days, yeah, it's not bad.
Yep. So you might also notice our super cool background that we have now.
It's super cool.
Yep. We ordered this off of Vistaprint. So if you like what you see here, you can check them out at vistaprint.com.
Wait a minute. They didn't sponsor us. You don't need to give them some huge commercial.
I know, but I like to, drop some helpful information every now and then.
And drop the price when we order stuff too, but okay.
All right, so today we are tackling the extreme age of comic books. It is period from 1992 to 1998. That was my time.
It's my time to run a comic book shop.
Yeah,
which wasn't a good choice.
So we have a little bit of inside information into this period. And later, I have a 90s edition of Stump the Old Man.
Of course.
Should be fun. All right, so give a few extra minutes for that dial-up internet, kids, because we're going back to the 90s. This is Back Issues. All right, comic lovers. So before we get started today, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on your notifications, give us a thumbs up, and if you like, leave us a comment. All right, so the extreme age from 1992 to 1998. Now, this is an episode that we've kind of covered already in a previous episode, episode 4, Comic Industry of the 90s. But if you're a comic collector, I think knowing about the industry of the 90s is something you should have in your education.
We're going to go deeper.
Yeah. So buckle up and get ready. So what do you say you take it away, old man?
All right. I shall run with it.
All right.
All right, so the extreme age, part of what most websites call the modern age, but EMoney and I decided that we split all that up, which we did. A lot of times it's called the dark age. It's also sometimes called the chrome age.
Why do they call it the chrome age, old man?
Well, I know the answer. It's because all the special covers, the holofoil covers, the chromium covers, the hologram covers, gatefold covers, it was ridiculous.
Because, they look so pretty, they're going to be so valuable someday, right?
It was just a way to con fans into buying multiple copies of a comic book, or to buy a comic book they wouldn't normally buy, let's face it. It's just a gimmick. So, I wanted to talk about the 90s, or 92 through 98, the extreme age, without discussing the crash. I can't do it.
Yeah.
I ran Comics America during this age over across the river from Louisville, Kentucky, in a little town called Clarksville, Indiana. So I suffered through this. So yeah, I'm making y'all suffer with me. All right, let's back it up. This is going to sound silly, but the success that comic book industry had in the 80s was partially to blame for what happened in the 90s. So, the Bronze Age and the Copper Age brought us some really great comic books. You had The Dark Knight Returns. I know it wasn't your favorite, but boy, it was good. Secret Wars, Watchmen, Crisis on Infinite Earths that we talked about last episode. Those and many, many more were top-notch quality comics. Now, the success of these titles got the attention of the media. So all of a sudden, when a comic book like Action Number 1 sells for $1 bazillion, or your Detective Number 27 sells for a whole bunch of money, the news is covering it on a national basis. Something the comic book industry had never gotten before. So all of a sudden, everybody wants to get that next big deal comic and get rich. Nobody was around to tell them that there weren't going to be any paper drives destroying all those comics, and that now that people were seriously collecting them, it's going to be tougher to do. So the publishers, being brilliant, soon realized that a major part of their sales came from speculators. Now, the realization that a comic book fan might buy multiple copies of a comic in order to resell it later was too intriguing or tempting. So the publisher started what I think were some pretty shady practices to capitalize on that. All right, multiple covers, let's face it, just like they are now, that's when they became the norm.
I mean, started with John Byrne in '86, we've mentioned that before, but it just took off in the 90s. I mean, it just became ridiculous.
Today, you've got variants, which at least you get a different artwork on it. You get something different from one to the other, and some of those variants are sold on a limited basis. Like if a comic book shop buys 100 comics of a title, they get this. So they're rare out the gate.
Well, you know what? Like it's ridiculous now. You know, all the different variants, and you know what, comic book industry? I ain't falling for it. I'm buying one issue and I'm sticking with it. You ain't getting me.
Other than what we get in our Heroes box, we only buy one copy of a comic book. Now, so multiple covers, normal. In fact, some of your comic books, like X-Men #1, had art on the cover that if you stacked them all together, it made one big long scene. Now you got cover E.
Mm-hmm.
Cover E is a gatefold cover that opens up and you get the whole scene in one comic book, but I think it was $1 higher or something.
Might have something to do with it being the highest selling comic book of all time?
It could be.
Yeah.
Could be. So, as I've mentioned before in segments of back issues, that up until now, publishers hadn't realized the importance of a #1 issue. Well, by the 90s, they figured it out. So, every opportunity they got, they'd relaunch the title with the #1 miniseries coming out every few seconds so that there was another #1. Now, I'll be honest, the old man himself has been guilty of being a first issue buyer. I went years buying the first issue of pretty much everything that came out. I mean, a lot of crap, but lucked into some good stuff.
Superman, Man of Tomorrow was mine. I held on to that #1 issue. It was like, oh, I mean, you know, Action #1 and Superman #1, Man of Steel #1, they're all worth money, so this has got to be worth big money someday.
He was a kid then.
Yeah.
All right.
$4. $4. That's how much it's worth now.
Well, one of the sleaziest things the publishers did, in my opinion, was the Polybag Scam.
Ah.
So, if you ask a publisher today why they put a comic book in a polybag, they're going to say, why? To protect it, of course. Bull crap. Bull crap. The reason was because if a customer wanted to read a comic, they'd have to buy 2 if they wanted to speculate on it, because you got to open the bag up, and no matter how carefully you open that bag, once you did not have a mint comic book anymore. The value went down. So people were forced into, I mean, I don't know how many, what was it, Batman Shadow of the Bat #1s people were buying. I think there was a Robin title that came polybagged, and boy, they were buying them up. So, at any rate, now X-Force. X-Force came polybagged with one of 5 cards in the back. Now, to be honest, that Deadpool card, I understand, is going for $10-20 now. But still, it was a scam. All right. Then you had the big event stories. In the early 90s, Bane broke Batman's back in Batman #497.
That was a big deal.
It was.
You know, they did a good job building up to this issue.
They did. Bane was smart too.
Yep.
Wore the man out. Anyway, Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, died in Fantastic Four #381. And Wolverine #75, Magneto ripped out Wolverine's adamantium. Ouch.
Yeah.
And of course, in Superman #75, the death of Superman. Now this comic book came in a regular edition. It came in the regular black polybagged edition, and it came in a limited platinum polybagged edition, complete with the Daily Planet obituary and a black armband.
Now, this was a big selling comic book at the time, so
huge.
I have to ask, this came out in January of '93. At what point did they announce that they were going to kill off Superman?
A couple months ahead, because we all knew when we solicited for it in our Diamond publication, Diamond previews, that that's what was going to happen, and we had the opportunity to buy a crap load of them.
I remember seeing ads in other comic books, before this, is like Doomsday is coming, and it was a big teaser because you didn't know what Doomsday was at that point.
Yeah, they built that storyline up pretty good.
Okay.
In fact, normally, when we talk about ordering Superman, Comics America, we probably ordered 20, 25 copies. It might sell out, but when we ordered this particular comic, the black polybagged, we ordered 1,000 of them.
Wow.
Now, we could have sold them all out within an hour of opening the store that day, but we kind of hit a box of 100 because Louisville Tonight, a local news show, was coming to film that night live from the shop, and we were having a wake for Superman. So we had a coffin and everything. So we wanted to make sure there were people in the store, so we told everybody that at 7 o'clock we were getting another shipment of 100 comic books. And there was people lined up around the store.
So you were being sleazy. I see how it is.
A little bit. I mean, still sold them. So at any rate, that day one gentleman and I got into a discussion, and he told me that his 2 copies that he bought, he was going to put his kids through college. I tried to explain to him, sir, you realize there's been more copies of this comic book printed than any other comic book in the last 20 years. It's never going to be worth a lot of money. Well, he didn't want to hear it, so he ignored me. So, backing up, due to the success of the 80s and the number of investment or collector comics that the shops were selling, tons of new publishers started popping up. Companies like Claypool Comics, Dagger Enterprises, Alternative Comics, Topps Comics, Hall of Heroes, Majestic Entertainment, Bongo Comics, and Triumphant Comics all threw their hat in the ring. Their hat got stomped on pretty quick. And then next, art becomes more important than the story. I'm sorry, that's just bass backwards. A lot of publishers even started putting out art books, or what I call pinup comics. No story at all, just one-page drawings, usually of female characters. There was Crawford Dawn Calendar, Vampirella Pinup Special, Bad Girls of Blackout, Kabuki Painted Calendar, and Lady Death in lingerie. And I'll be honest, Marvel, DC, and Image, they all did the same thing, but this whole practice was so ridiculous that I didn't have the heart to keep looking up the titles, so that's enough. But at any rate, did the publishers not realize that the customers were going to get wise? I don't think they did, but they did. Most of these comics that were coming out in the 90s, a high percentage of them were just crap.
Crap as in they had made too many of them, or because they were crap comics, as in bad?
They made too many of them, but that's a whole different subject. They weren't good.
Okay.
They weren't worth the paper they were printed on. You don't see a lot of 90s comic books up here because I didn't keep any of them. I mean, these are all from, I think these are all from your collection.
Yep, pretty much, yep.
Stuff because you were a big comic book guy in the 90s that you hung on to.
Well, I confession time. I mean, I did get a lot of comic books in the 90s, but I was a kid and I didn't take good care of them. So these comic books are ones that I have tracked down and bought new copies of to relive my youth a little bit.
but they're the comics that you read as a kid, so they mean something to you.
Yes.
Well, if you compare these to other stuff you've read,
Mm-hmm.
I know you know they ain't that good.
Mm-hmm.
But
the other comic books of the 90s, yeah, there were a lot of
compared to
deaths
the ones in the 90s, these are the cream of the crop.
Yeah, I mean, these are great. Yeah.
But at any rate, so the customers got wise. They figured out that art over story will never make a good comic, and that's my opinion, and I'm going to preach that from now until I can't preach anymore. The gimmicks were crap. And once the speculators realized they weren't going to make any money, they weren't going to send their kids to school, the speculators disappeared. I mean, I remember guys that were coming in buying multiple copies and walking out of the store with a stack of comics this big. All of a sudden, stopped coming. Didn't see them anymore. So, the comics hit the fan sometime in late 94, early 95. Customers were gone. The shops had ordered too much product and we got stuck with them. And a lot of the shops went under because they spent too much on inventory that they couldn't sell. The publishers had printed too many copies for the fewer shops left to sell them, so they were stuck. And the industry panicked. Some publishers just disappeared, went away. People lost their jobs. The media that had covered the massive success of the comic book industry in the 80s was there to cover the fall in the 90s. And that only made things worse. In 1994, Marvel lost $48.5 million. $48.5 million. Now, 3 years before, they were making a crazy amount of money. They're just so profitable just a few years before. So, 94, you get the crash, 95. Then in 1996, Marvel filed Chapter 11. They were bankrupt. Yeah, of course they survived. We know that. Mostly thanks to Hollywood.
I mean, I've said before, this is one good thing that came out of the 90s crash was Marvel selling their products to make movies, like from New Line Cinema and from Fox. And it's what kind of brought about the golden age of comic book movies. You had those first few movies, Blade, Spider-Man, X-Men. All those films were a result of the crash and them putting out their products.
You're right. That's why we're covering the movie age next week.
Okay,
So, now let's get back to extreme age.
All right.
But that's it on the crash, more or less. I might mention it again 10, 30, 50 times, I don't know. But another topic that was extremely important in the extreme age was the exodus. Now, I mentioned before that a lot of artists were gradually becoming dissatisfied with the normal way creators were treated. They might, while working for a publisher, create the next Batman or Superman. Tough, because they're going to have that character taken away from them. They were basically paid on a per-page system with little or no control over their own fate, the fate of their characters, or the fate of their storylines. So, in the early 90s, a group of creators said, enough is enough. Now, there's been times when I've spoken poorly about some of the individuals in this group, but as a group, I gotta give them credit. They planned it out. They had meetings with both Marvel and DC, told them what they were about to do, and cautioned Marvel and DC that if you guys keep doing business the way you've been doing it, we're not the only guys that are going to jump ship. They were right. So they worked out a deal with Malibu to get the much needed support, like, printing and some of the executive stuff that they need in those early stages, and they began Image Comics.
Now, I have to ask, when these guys walked out on the other comic companies, what was the effect on sales figures for what they had been previously working on, if there was one?
Well, a lot of the times everybody just, didn't pay attention to it. Yeah, great. There's a guy.
Didn't pay attention who was making the comic.
Didn't pay attention that Jim Lee is no longer with whoever he was with at the time. We didn't care McFarlane left drawing Spider-Man because somebody else was going to draw it.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see what these guys do. Maybe they'll do something cool. And in some cases, they did. So, seven guys founded Image Comics. They were Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson, Mark Silvestri, Jim Valentine, and, Whilce Portacio. Each of these partners started their own studio within Image. They came up with two simple rules to follow. 1. Image would not own any creator's work. The creator would. Image itself would own no intellectual property except the company trademarks, its name, and its logo. 2. No Image partner would interfere creatively or financially with any other partner's work. Good rules. Mm-hmm. And they stuck with it. So the first of their comics to hit the stands were Lee's Wildcats, McFarlane's Spawn, Eric Larson's Savage Dragon, and Rob Liefeld's Youngblood. Now, due to the popularity of the artist, these comics sold extremely well. In fact, within a year, Image no longer needed Malibu support, and they parted company with them. They didn't need them anymore. The problem was that none of these guys had any experience with running a business. And pretty soon it started showing up. Now, in my opinion, during the first few years, these 7 creators spent way too much time celebrating their success and promoting themselves that they forgot they had a product that needed to be put out. Liefeld, Lee were the absolute worst. McFarlane got pretty close to hitting the schedule with Spawn. But the rest of the group, man, you'd see them, there'd be pictures of them out partying, having a good time, at conventions, signing their butts off, but not drawing comic books.
Yeah.
It got so bad that the words late and Image were constantly in the same sentence. Constantly. It got so bad that the fans started to lose interest.
So, you're saying these guys were some of George R.R. Martin's heroes?
Yeah, you can put them in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, the comic shops placed their orders with the distributor, but by the time, which normally would be a 2-month delay, but these things weren't coming back in 4 or 5 months. It was ridiculous. So, by the time they did show up, fans lost interest. They were buying something else. So, and this was another nail in the coffin that was the crash. So at any rate, most of the partners, other than Larson and Valentine, started contracting others to work on their comics, which isn't that exactly what they jumped ship to get away from? So they were guilty of doing it eventually. So they hired a guy named Larry Mulder, who was a creator in his own right, to act as their executive director. And one of the main things that he accomplished was to not allow a comic to be solicited. You couldn't put it in the Diamond Preview until the artwork was done. So at least then he knew the comic was far enough along that it might hit a deadline. Now this helped get Image back on schedule. I give that guy a lot of props. He had his job cut out for him. I wouldn't have taken that job. But it was probably too little too late, and by then the crash already rolled over a lot of shops. Just rolled over them. For what's worth, you know our buddy Rob Liefeld?
Our good buddy, yeah.
Due to disputes with the other partners in 1996, Rob resigned and gave up his shares of the company. But I'm going to give those guys credit. They eventually got their act together. And unlike a lot of stuff they put out today, I mean, if you watch our reviews, you see there's a lot of Image comics that we get. Let's face it, they made Kentucky native Robert Kirkman a partner, and he gave us The Walking Dead and Invincible. Now, didn't you tell me Invincible?
Amazon Prime coming out.
New show?
Yep.
I think it's animated, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking forward to that. So, moving on. this week while we're recording this, it's the last week of Black History Month. So let's talk about another event in this extreme age. This one's a good thing, not a negative. In '93, a coalition of African-American comic book creators, including Dennis Cowan, Michael Davis, Dwayne McDuffie, and Derek T. Dingle, created Milestone Comics. These guys rightfully believed that minorities were not getting a fair shake in the industry, and they decided to step up. Milestone would be published by DC Comics, but DC would not have any editorial control over these guys' work. The Milestone creators could tell their stories however they wanted. They launched several new titles, including Static, Hardware, Icon, and Blood Syndicate. Now, I felt like Static was a lot like early Amazing Spider-Man, which is a good thing, because I love those stories. And the other titles were solid, and I pretty much enjoyed all of them, especially Blood Syndicate. I think that might have been my favorite. Yeah, I think it was. All right, you ready to roll out some comic book covers?
All right, let's go.
I wonder if that was real loud when I did that.
Probably, yeah.
Oh, well. Here's some more stuff that happened during the Extreme Age. Carnage appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 361 in early 1992.
Now, admittedly, in the 90s, I was a DC man because, I mean, you might notice most of my comic books over here are DC stuff.
3 out of 4.
Yeah, so I didn't read a lot of Marvel, but right now that's on my want list. Amazing Spider-Man number 361. I want that Carnage cover. So
anybody's got an affordable copy of number 361, get in touch with EMoney.
Yeah.
All right. So in May that same year, 92, Jay Lee, not Jim Lee, Jay Lee, had his first art for Marvel in Name of the Submariner number 26. Not a great comic, but the art was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So about the same time, if you want to talk gimmicks, which I do, Captain America number 400 came out. Even my guy was into it. It's an 80-page giant, a double gatefold cover, and it was a flip book. So you could read the first story like this, and then you flipped it over to read the other story. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, this book had a cover price of $2.25. See if you can get that for it now. I doubt it. All right, in the mid part of that year, 1992, Amazing Spider-Man number 365 came out, and that was the 30th anniversary issue, and it had a hologram cover.
Of course it did.
Let's see how that shows up in the video. Late 92, your boy Azrael appeared for the first time in Batman Sword of Azrael number 1.
Yeah, he would play a major part in the Batman story in the 90s.
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
Also in late 92, the Big Blue Boy Scout kicked the bucket in Superman number 75. Now this is another good thing. In early 93, DC published the first of its new adult-oriented Vertigo imprint with Death, the High Cost of Living number 1. And it also moved some of their existing titles like Swamp Thing, Hellblazer, Sandman, Doom Patrol, Animal Man, and Shade the Changing Man over to Vertical and made them a little more adult-oriented. Now, some of those books were good. I didn't like Doom Patrol so much. I liked the old Doom Patrol. But anyway, back to your guy. In mid-93, Batman number 500 comes out, and Azrael becomes the new Batman. So then, in that same year, Image and Valiant put out their first intercompany crossover event called Deathmate. Now, I had big hopes for that one. I really thought that was going to have a big silver chrome cover. Thought it was going to be a great story. Story actually wasn't too bad, but it tanked, which made me sad. Also, in mid-1993, Marvel gives Deadpool his own comic book.
To big success, or?
It did pretty well.
Okay. You just,
I don't like the Merc with a mouth. his Night of the Living Dead miniseries.
Yeah, he just read Night of the Living Deadpool, which he enjoyed, but he still...
It's still Deadpool.
Yeah.
He still does penis jokes in the first 5 minutes of a movie that kids are watching.
I know, right? Whose balls did I have to fondle to get my very own movie? I can't tell you, but it does rhyme with Pulverine.
Well, the kids shouldn't be watching that.
You know they watched it.
It's right. Okay, if you brought your kid to see Deadpool, you're either stupid or you're a bad parent, okay? Well, I'm going to put it out there.
Then there's a lot of bad parents out there because all the kids have seen Deadpool.
It's rated freaking R, okay?
Yeah, but it's on DVD, so... Did you watch stuff you weren't supposed to?
Okay, there's a difference between being a bad parent who, like, voluntarily brings their kid to the movie, and then there's lazy parents who just, you know... They don't know what their kids get up to when they're not around.
I knew.
I could
you
understand.
were peeking over my shoulder late at night watching Predator.
I could understand lazy parents. I mean, everyone gets tired every now and then. But if you're bringing the kid to the movie, then that's on you. Okay.
All right, shut your mouth.
All right.
A couple of months later, Moon Knight number 55 came out, and this was Stephen Platt's first artwork with Marvel. Boy, did we underorder that one. It was beautiful. Beautiful artwork. Loved it. Late that year, Hellboy shows up for the first time in, I think John Byrne was doing Next Men, number 21. I think there was a backup story where they showed us Hellboy for the first time. During 93, a lot of publishers stopped putting out comics. They included Disney Comics, Eclipse Comics, First Comics, Innovation, Personality Comics, and Vortex Comics. Some of these companies did really good work. I mean, I enjoyed a lot of their stuff for the short time they were in business. Now we'll go into 1994, and we're just going to keep the ball rolling with companies that went under the next year. And next year we had Aircell Comics, Blackball Comics, Comic Zone Productions, Continuity Comics, Dagger Enterprises, Eternity Comics, Majestic Entertainment, Now Comics, Revolutionary Comics, Silver Moon Comics, and Triumphant Comics. All disappeared that year. Triumphant Comics did not triumph. In early 94, Kal Rayner becomes the new Green Lantern in Green Lantern number 48. I didn't really care. I'm always going to be a Hal Jordan guy. At any rate, X-Men number 30. Scott Summers marries Jean Grey. And wraparound cover. In mid-94, Thor number 475 comes out, which reintroduces Dr. Don Blake and Jane Foster. Why am I mentioning that? Because EMoney and I are reading the current Thor storyline, and yeah, you'll understand it if you're reading it. All right. Oh. Also about this time, one I hate mentioning, and it's the Spider-Man Clone Saga, which kicked off in Web of Spider-Man number 17. It was supposed to last...
117.
117?
Yes.
Well, you'll put the right cover up.
Okay.
It was supposed to last 1 year, and a big crossover event hit all the Spider-Man titles, but it ran at least twice that long, and it seemed like for freaking ever.
And wasn't there like publishers regret in a lot of the story, like, okay, we shouldn't have done that, let's backtrack it, and they start retconning events and saying, like, oh, that didn't actually happen the way we said it did.
But now you have the multiverse, and what difference does it make?
Right.
All right, so in November of 1994, Marvel purchased Malibu Comics. In the heat of all this disaster, they decided to buy a comic book company. Why? Well, for a long time, there was rumors that they wanted Malibu's superior coloring technology. But it turns out that's not true because, let's face it, they could have hired the entire Malibu coloring staff for a fraction of what they paid for the company. But I think they had plans for the Malibu characters. In fact, they put out a few, like the crossover event in Ultra Force Avengers number 1 and Avengers Ultra Force number 1. Now, I enjoyed those covers, or those comics. I thought they were pretty good. I mean, I like teams, and when you get two teams together, got to be some good stuff. But they couldn't maintain it because at the time they were struggling to just keep their own stuff going. They couldn't maintain characters from another company. I don't know, maybe if Marvel still owns the rights, maybe we'll see a Prime movie someday. Prime was horrible. He wasn't that good. So, it's late 1994, a few days after Christmas, on the 28th, Marvel bought distributor Heroes World Distribution. That didn't last long, and it just contributed to all the confusion and problems that brought about the crash. In early 95, Marvel puts out Amazing Spider-Man number 400, die-cut embossed cover, of course, that had the death of Aunt May.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Aunt May's a resilient old woman. She's still around.
Yep.
All right.
In fact, she seems to get younger as we go.
In the movie, she sure did.
Yeah.
Woo!
Right?
All right. April 30th, 1995. DC Comics announces that its comics will now be distributed exclusively by the Diamond Comics distribution, which, let's face it, that was direct response to what Marvel did. And this pretty much killed off most of the smaller distributors and pretty much put Diamond Comics on a path to being a monopoly, which, ask any comic book shop owner, that's a bad, bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so July 24th, 95, both Dark Horse Comics and Image Comics announced that they have signed an agreement with Diamond Comics, and they're going to be their exclusive distributor. See what I mean? Then in July 96, Diamond acquires Capital City Distribution, its last remaining major competitor. You heard the theme music from Jaws? Should. If you notice, I haven't been listing off a lot of comic book events for this year. That's because most of the stuff in 96 were titles being canceled. And I'll be honest, I got no desire to list that. That's too sad. Then in late 96, Clark marries Lois in the Superman wedding album.
Now, this was a really cool comic book, if I can just take a moment here, because it was an event that had been building up since 1938. I mean, all the courtship over the decades had finally culminated into this issue, and they knew it. They knew it was a big deal, which is why they invited writers and artists to come back to be a part of this. So you had artists from the Silver and Bronze Age who were still with us. They came back, and they would all write or draw 1 or 2 pages of the comic, and that's why you see a big mix of different artwork throughout this issue. So this was a big deal, and it was a joyous occasion for the comic industry at the time.
Well, I got a question.
Yes.
On the honeymoon, did he tell her?
Oh no, she had known for a while. She had known for a long time.
That'd be a hell of a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so late 96, December, Marvel declared bankruptcy. That's when it actually happened. Then I got to come up with something. All right, 97.
Mm-hmm.
Late 97, we're just going to skip most of 97. After being canceled for too long, Marvel brings back the Avengers and the Fantastic Four. And yeah, I mean, that's the only thing good I had to say about 97. 97 just sucked. And the only thing I could find that was important in 98 that didn't suck, like more stuff being canceled, was Toy Biz bought Marvel out of bankruptcy. Yeah, you heard me. Toy Biz.
Well, I mean, that makes total sense because, I mean, if you had action figures like me as a kid in the 90s, a lot of them were, Marvel characters, and they came from Toy Biz.
Yeah, they sure didn't want Marvel going away.
Right. And, admittedly, a lot of those toys in the 90s were, Rob Liefeld characters like Cable and Deadpool and...
all those X guys.
Was Forge a Liefeld character?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
I had a Forge, too, that I played with a lot. So, yeah. So, it may seem strange on the outside, but if you know, Toy Biz buying them out makes total sense.
Yep, it does. And Toy Biz became a division of the new company called Marvel Enterprises. So, if you didn't know before, you know now why the extreme age is also called the Dark Age.
All right, so there it is, the extreme age of comic books. All right, so I believe we have a round of Stump the Old Man to play upstairs. So let's head back out. Let's head back out to the garage with Thor. All right, kids, it's time for our 90s edition of Stump the Old Man and our special Thor question in the middle, of course. All right, so best 2 out of 3. Much like Harley Quinn, what 90s character first appeared on Batman the Animated Series and would later take up the mantle of the Question?
Okay, I never watched that TV show, so I don't know.
Okay. The correct answer was Renee Montoya.
Okay.
Renee Montoya would take down a corrupt cop and then quit the GCPD, and for a while she gave in to substance abuse with drugs and alcohol.
Shame on her.
But the Question saw potential in her and groomed her to take over his mantle after he learned he was dying of lung cancer. All right, so there's number 1, 0 for 1. Number 2, what was the 90s Thor Thunderstrike's real name?
No idea.
All right, that's 0 for 2.
So I lose.
Yep.
We quit now, right?
The correct answer was Eric Masterson, or Kevin Masterson, his father, depending on which version you think of. I would have accepted.
So now you're asking me questions where there's multiple answers.
I would have accepted either answer. All right.
Cheating.
So this next one, just for fun.
It's cheating.
In the epic 1996 crossover event, Marvel vs. DC, the 5 biggest battles were decided by voters. Name 3 of them.
Ooh, Batman and Captain America. Spider-Man was in there. Spider-Man and Superboy. I can't believe I remember this one, of all ones to remember. Deadpool. No Deadpool?
Nope.
I was going to say Deadpool and Lobo.
Okay, I guess that is incorrect.
Sweep. Didn't get a single question right. It's all your fault.
The battles were Hulk versus Superman, of which Superman won. And, you know, when you're doing, when it's based on votes and you go up against Superman, good luck. Batman versus Captain America, of which Batman won. Wonder Woman versus Storm, of which Storm won. I was a little surprised by that one based on votes. Yeah. Superboy versus Spider-Man. Of course, Spider-Man won that. I mean,
he also shouldn't.
Yeah. If they had done Spider-Man versus Superman, I don't know how that would have gone down based on votes. And then finally, Wolverine versus Lobo.
Wolverine versus Lobo.
Of which Wolverine won that one. All right, so 0 for 3 this week. The old man is most definitely stumped.
That sucked.
All right, comic lovers, that about does it for this episode. But before we go, we got a little bit about what we're going to be doing next week. And next week, I believe, is our final installment in our History of Comic Book series. And we are doing the movie age, 1998 to the present. So,
and thank goodness for it.
Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Well, you can get a treat later. All right, so doing the modern / movie age, and we'll be back here with Thor once more. All right, we'll see you guys next week. Excelsior.
True believers, take care of your fur buddies.
Yep. Who's a good poochie? Who's a good poochie? You are.